Hari Om everyone. Manasama, there is so much spiritual glow behind you that we can't see you clearly. You will have to move little bit towards your left. Yeah. This is much better. Actually, the light behind you was right hitting on the camera. Okay. So, going by the question which was assigned to you all last week, the question was, by refraining from Rajasic food, one doesn't become sattvic. Explain. Having gone through the elaborate answers you all have given, quite impressed with the input all of you have given from different perspectives, and all of you have rightly said, rightly clarified. So the main reason why, just an additional, perhaps a technical point just to keep in mind as far as this aspect is concerned. Now, why by merely refraining from Rajasic food, or for that matter, by adopting Sattvic food, would not make you Sattvic? It's obviously the same thing. Either I refrain from Rajasic food or I start eating Sattvic food. Does that necessarily make me Sattvic? It doesn't, which everybody said rightly so. Now, the fundamental reason is the food we consume is gross in nature. It is at the physical level. Vis-a-vis the gunas or the mental temperaments, which is the sattva, rajas and tamas, they belong to the mind. They are the realm of your inner personality. The physical body refers to your outer personality. So just by bringing about a change at the gross level will not bring about a change at the subtle level, which is the mind or the intellect or the inner personality. Okay, so the law which establishes this argument is, it is the subtle that controls the gross. It is the subtle that controls the gross, but not the gross controlling the subtle. So if you go by that law of life, it is always the subtle that controls the gross. So it is the mind and its mental temperaments that will start reflecting on your physical personality. It starts reflecting on the food you eat. It starts reflecting in the environment you keep. How you keep your environment. Is it all organized? Is it all messy? Everything depends on the state of your mind. What kind of clothing you choose. What kind of sights you see. Everything is controlled, driven by the mind. So it is the subtle that controls the gross. Now, if that be true, does food play any role at all in the conditioning or influencing one's spiritual growth? That is a very pertinent aspect. If food doesn't influence, doesn't change the state of your mind from rajas to sattva, by merely eating sattvic food, does it make you sattvic? No. But then should you stop from eating sattvic food? In fact, a rajasic person can't eat sattvic food. I remember a few families, whenever I visited them, the lady in the house, in particular, one lady I'm referring to, I can't take her name, very sweet, very loving, very, very devoted, very genuine. And they used to host me whenever I visited that city, and lovely food they prepare, sattvic, wonderful. But when she comes to the table, next to her plate, there is another small bowl with green chilies. She is so considerate for the rest of the family and me that she wouldn't put it green chilies, she wouldn't make spicy. But literally, it's a bowl full of red cut chilies, and by the end of the meal, the bowl is empty. So every mouthful, she will take a green chili and bite. Every mouthful. So can you imagine, she couldn't eat the food. It was not palatable to them, palatable to her, because of her rajasic nature. So rajasic people, even if they were given sattvic food, they will not take it. Similarly, sattvic people will often complain if the food becomes little spicy or pungent or a bit strong. They can't adapt to it. It becomes very difficult. And obviously, tamasic food. I commend the detail in which Sethuramanji clarified in the group, what is sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic. In fact, if you all need to know a little further, please go to the 17th chapter, if I'm not wrong. You go there and you'll get entire detail of what is sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic food, etc. Now, even though the food doesn't change the nature of your mind, but food is certainly conducive. Just like any gross environment, external environment is conducive to the state of your mind. Just like when I plant a mango seed, I need the soil which is conducive for the seed to be planted, isn't it? I need the soil. Without the soil, I can't plant the seed. But having planted the seed in a conducive soil, when the tree starts yielding fruits, can I attribute it is the soil that produced the fruit? Can I say the fruit is of the best quality because of the quality of the soil? Can we say so? Are you all listening to me? Are you all with me? Is there an audio issue for you all? Some of them are complaining. How is it at your end? How is the audio? Is it good? Okay. Those of you who have issues may want to try logging out and logging back in. That might help. The question I asked was that no doubt the food directly is not instrumental in changing the state of your mind, but food is conducive. Similarly, when I plant a particular, let's say a mango seed, and when the tree grows up and start yielding fruits, do I attribute the quality of the fruit to the seed or to the soil? Obviously, it is the seed. It has nothing to do with the soil, isn't it? But still, you need a soil to plant the seed. Exactly the same way, you need a conducive environment so that you can give yourself an opportunity to nurture your gunas. But it is not the environment alone or the food here alone determines and defines the nature of your mind. Ultimately, you got to give it the appropriate food the mental food here. So the mental food here is the higher knowledge, the values, the nurturing, the sadhana. All this becomes the food for the mind so that it transforms into a predominantly sattvic nature. But if that is deprived, the more you feed rajasic thoughts, you feed rajasic music, you feed rajasic input, it only makes you more and more rajasic. The more sattvic you give yourself the input, there's a fair chance that it is conducive so that sattvic thoughts, whatever sattva is there in you, starts manifesting. Just like the desire for something only manifests when there is a conducive environment, isn't it? Otherwise, the desire remains dormant in you. When does one entertain a desire for something? Or when does the desire get activated in you? When does a desire get activated in you? In the sense, what is it that triggers the desire is the question. The desire is latent in me. But what is it that triggers the desire? You're right. In fact, Jayama says supply. I don't know who that VA is, but the answer is right. It is the stimuli. The question, Amar, is what is it that stimulates the thoughts in you? The desire is a thought. The desire is dormant. The moment you see stimuli from the external world, so when the stimuli reaches you, that is when your mind gets triggered. That is when the desire gets activated. So to that extent, the food or the external environment is conducive to trigger the latent gunas or desires or vasanas. Okay? But the main principle you got to keep in mind is subtle controls the gross never controls subtle. So food should be an aspect of your sadhana. Food should not determine your sadhana. Many spiritual practices, I know they get together, they bring all the ingredients, they prepare sattvic food, they eat, and that is the beginning and end of their sadhana. So everyone who comes to the satsang have to bring 2 to 3 kgs of fresh vegetables and a cutting board and knife. Imagine every time we gather, I tell you all, please bring fresh fruits and vegetables with a cutting board knife. And all of us gather in a circle and start cutting all the vegetables and fruits. And after that, make a lovely salad and eat. And do a prayer and leave. That is the spiritual sadhana once a week we are doing. The result of that would be, maybe you will become, your cholesterol will get less, your blood pressure and blood sugar will less, but your sattva will not become high. That is guarantee. So the cause and effect has to be established. Alright. So that's with reference to the question. So the last we did, if not wrong, was the 25th verse. We started the concept of yajna. As I've said, in any yajna, there are 2 aspects. One is the offering, other is the kindling. So the first 2 talks about spiritual seekers, some who are quite capable of just conceiving a relative goal, a limited goal, and a rare few of them are able to conceive an absolute goal of self-realization. So in the first yajna, a quick recap, when one lives a life of yajna. Yajna fundamentally means you are a person with, you are a giver. In short, you are a giver. You are a man of service and sacrifice. You live a life of unselfishness. So when you live a life of unselfishness, so when you sacrifice your physical, mental and intellectual, whatever resources you have, your physical body, your mind and intellect, when you do for a larger well-being, what you derive out of that sacrificial life is sukham, happiness. So what is kindle? What kindles in your life is happiness. On the contrary, it would mean when one leads a life of trying to feed his own selfish desires and his ego, every time you're only thinking of what I need, what my needs are, what my thoughts are, what my feelings are. And as long as your thoughts are non-yajna, you will find such a person's life is constantly riddled with sorrow and suffering. You will find sorrow is a very common visitor in your life because of your own non-yajna spirit. So you must find yourself, your life is defined by the spirit of yajna. Is to think of others' well-being, to accommodate others in every walk of life. To accommodate, just to accommodate. Your thought swells to include others. The thought should not shrink that you can't even accommodate others' interests. So how large can your heart swell? How beyond can your heart go? That is yajna. Now the second is when you have reached, in fact, as I've said, yajna is the tool with which you uplift yourself from the lower to the higher. You spiritually evolve through yajna. But as natural, okay, what is the most natural thing that happens when you do anything? Like Anash Krishna Swami said, what is the most natural thing that happens when you do anything in life?
We think of ourselves.
Yes, sir. Rajinikanth was holding a. What about this one? There's a beautiful resound of your answer, so we could hear a few times. So the question, what I'm looking at is when I'm not necessarily saying you're performing a selfish activity, but we are only talking about yajna here. Verses 25 to 30 talks of various yajnas. So when one entertains this thought of selfishness or doership, there is no question of you being a person of yajna spirit. You are a non-yajna person. Okay, sir? Okay, Rajima, you are saying doership. So as long as a person entertains an attitude of doership is that arrogating notion of I have done something, it is mine. That kind of a notion, you can't have that. So as long as you have the non-yajna spirit, you don't belong in this category. So you are performing that yajna, that spirit of sacrifice, you are a giver, as I've said. Keeping those actions in mind, in fact, it happens to all actions. Whether you perform selfish or unselfish, but I am strictly limiting to unselfish actions. So when one performs such actions, what happens? What's the most natural thing that happens? Yeah, Vasantama.
is very fulfilling. You feel happy, contented. You feel nice about the whole atmosphere.
Okay. Now let me give an example. Don't mind, Vasantama, you are correct. But we have not got to the crux which I am looking at. Let's say your grandchildren have come from US. They have come to spend a month in India, and they spend considerable amount of that month at home with you all. And you have made good use of the time bonding with your grandchildren, and they have spent the time with grandparents, and you had a lovely time, a very fruitful time. Now, in the process of spending those moments with your grandchildren, what is the natural thing that is happening is the question. Just taking an example. What's the natural thing that could happen? Invariably it happens.
You perform all the...
Are you following my line of thought, Vasantama? I'm sorry, could you come again?
You perform the action willingly, and automatically it comes to you. You don't have to put an effort.
Fair enough. In fact, what I was wanting to get at, which some of them are commenting, is that you unknowingly have developed an attachment for them. So any action you find you enjoy, this is the thumb rule. Keep in mind, thumb rule is whenever you start enjoying anything in life, you start developing an attachment to it. Like when you meet a new person in your life and he starts bringing a new joy in your life, a new friend, a new partner, a new toy, a new destination, a new job, a new car, anything new, anything that gives you joy, what happens naturally is you develop an attachment to it. And this happens naturally. And any attachment, as we have learned, is binding. It binds you, limits you, restricts you, confines you. Isn't it? We have always established that. Now, when you have performed sacrifice, and what is it that you get when you live a life of sacrifice? Happiness. We have just said happiness. When you live a life of sacrifice, you gain happiness. Now, when you gain happiness, what happens thereafter? You will start unknowingly developing an attachment to that very act of sacrifice itself. Unknowingly you have developed an attachment to it. Therefore, some spiritual seekers are of a different caliber. What they do? They sacrifice. So the second yajna is the offering. What they offer is the very sacrifice itself. So when you offer the very sacrifice itself, so you are sacrificing sacrifice. When you sacrifice, what you get out of it is self-realization, Brahman. That is the highest. So the last thing that goes is the very spirit of yajna itself. Last thing. I remember I could capture the question which I didn't have purview to because of some technical issue at my end. I remember Sitaramji had posed a question, and I did take a note of that question. Please correct me, Sitaram, if this is what you were asking. The words I think you wrote or you used were, it's untenable to sacrifice when you are using sacrifice as a means to serve mankind? How can you tell us to sacrifice itself? Is that what you intended last time? I'm just waiting for his comments because as he is typing.
Kindly repeat the question. Guruji.
Yes, sir.
Kindly repeat the question.
Yes, I shall repeat. Sorry?
Voice is not very clear.
Voice is not very clear. Is it the same for others as well? I think some of them find it quite okay, Vidramanji, but I will repeat the question. In fact, Sitaramji is clarified. He says, one does bhajan to seek peace and tranquility. So it will also lead to attachment to bhajans. So should one eschew it? What is eschew? Is that the right? Okay. Should one avoid it? No. Okay. Now, no. See, not necessary. That's not what is being advised or recommended. So just because you get attached to something, if that's what is true as what you are saying, if I perform bhajans and that gives me great peace and tranquility as you said, and if I have to avoid it because I am developing an attachment to it, that's not being spiritual at all. So, which literally means you'll have to abandon yourself, you'll have to distance yourself from all that you have got attached to. Can you tell me one thing in life that you are not attached to? One thing. Which means literally you will have to run away from everything, which is the most impractical school of thought. It is not possible at all. Now therefore, we will have to get back to understanding what is attachment detachment. We have already established it many a time on this platform. We said that attachment or detachment is a pure mental quality. It is nothing to do with your physical association or your relationship. It is the mental attitude that all that matters. So, when you develop an attachment to bhajans, if somebody else were to criticize your bhajans, if somebody were to pass a loose remark, it would hurt you that much more as much it gave you peace. Isn't it? If somebody is attached to his political party or a leader or a guru or for that matter anything and somebody opposes it, there is a friction within you. You entertain hatred, anger, bitterness. So all this is because of your attachment. So when you are detached to it, it gives you the best to eke the most out of it. In fact, you eke the most out of it when you are detached, because you become objective. So it serves your purpose and you have grown beyond the purpose. So everything has a purpose. Everything has a limited purpose. Please understand that. Nothing has an absolute purpose in life. Can you tell me anything which has an absolute purpose? Everything in life has a purpose which is limited. It's a limited purpose. Tell me one thing that has an absolute purpose, unlimited purpose. Rajima? I thought you were going to say that, Sitaram. Sorry, ma? Could you repeat what you said, Rajima? You said knowledge, that's what Sitaram also said, the Gita knowledge, attending these classes. Even this knowledge also serves a limited purpose, because it only takes you to a certain point. It only serves a certain purpose. Like the vehicle, it only serves you limited purpose. It takes you from point A to point B. It can take you to your doorstep, but you'll have to get off your car, however comfortable it is, and then you got to go into your house. Your car can't be taken into your living room. There is a limited purpose to it. So knowledge also will only take you to the threshold, to the verge of realization, but knowledge cannot give you moksha, as somebody was commenting. Knowledge cannot give you realization. Knowledge can only take you to the verge of realization. So knowledge also is limited. Please understand that. Like a boat can take you from one shore to other, but thereafter you have to get off the boat, disembark the boat, and then go onto the shore. It only takes you to that point. That's where he says that sacrifice takes you to the pinnacle of perfection, a step short of realization, but thereafter you will have to let that go to reach that state of Brahman. So everything in life, so when I say everything has a limited purpose, what it means is everything serves as a means to an end. Nothing is an end in itself. Everything serves as a means to an end. Whether be it the family, whether be it wealth, whether be it society, whether be it job, whether be it wealth, whether be it your service, whether be it knowledge, whether be your guru, whether be anything that you are associating with, has only a limited purpose, serves a means to an end. You're not wrong, Sitaram, when you say that knowledge itself, if you're not careful, can you develop a bondage or attachment, and it doesn't help you grow.
Like the pole in the pole vaulter. Like the pole vaulter.
Thanks, Tata, for reminding. Yes, as we did mention last week about the pole vaulter. The pole serves a purpose to cross the bar in that game, or that sport of pole vaulting. The pole vaulter cannot cross the bar without the pole. You cannot cross the bar with the pole. You cannot hold on to the bar and expect to hold on to the pole and expect to cross the bar. So everything serves a limited purpose, but the problem is you are not using it for the purpose it intended. You are holding on to it. You are holding on to it. So so I thought your question was, why should I sacrifice? Sacrifice is what you intended. you said. No, it is not the question of performing the right action, it's the question of holding on to the right action. It's like when you were in kindergarten, that class, that teacher, that knowledge, those books, that environment helped you grow. But then why didn't you and I got stuck in the kindergarten the rest of our lives? But it's not that way, isn't it? It has served through the journey, you moved on. Must learn to move on. But everybody comes to the spiritual field and what they have developed is, what is the spiritual disease? Yes, Sajraman Garu.
Attachment.
Everybody has developed an attachment to all what they are doing. Correct? Sad. It's such a sad thing. Nobody. In fact, in the Gita, he goes one step ahead and he says, Krishna tells to Arjuna, your guru is an impediment in your performance of your duty. So Krishna tells to Arjuna, you don't think twice, you shoot arrow against your guru to kill him. So if your guru is an obstacle for your sadhana, please get rid of him. But that's only in the Gita, don't take it literally please. You may find reasons to do things, so I am just protecting myself here. That was otherwise only meant for Arjuna, not meant for you and me, please. But so, Guru also serves a purpose. Everything serves a purpose. So you got to be very, very alert to understand has it served its purpose or not. And you would know. If you are objective, you would know. It's yes, it has served my purpose. You move on. Okay? So let's get on with the third yajna, which appears in verse 26. श्रोत्रादीनीन्द्रियानन्ये संयमाग्निषु जुह्वति शब्दादीन् विषयानन्ये इन्द्रियाग्निषु जुह्वति श्रोत्रादीनीन्द्रियानन्ये संयमाग्निषु जुह्वति शब्दादीन् विषयानन्ये इन्द्रियाग्निषु जुह्वति. Now here he talks about the third and the fourth yajna. The third and fourth yajna, the verse reads, others offer hearing and other senses as sacrifice in the fires of restraint. Others offer sound and other objects of senses as sacrifice in the fires of restraint, of senses. In the fires of senses. Indriyagnishu juhvati, sanyamagnishu juhvati. So, what you got to, please keep remembering this chart which I am expanding just for a moment. You take a note of it. So, as it says, the 26th verse talks about yajna of perception. I'll explain, but the 26th verse, first yajna of perception. What is offered is the stimuli, what is kindled is perception, and then the fourth yajna of restraint, as I've said, Sanyamagnishu. Sanyam means restraint. GI refers to the gross intellect. For some of you may not understand what GI means. Restrained by the gross intellect. What you are offering are your perceptions. What is kindled is your self-control. So this is the yajna of perception. Let me go to the third yajna. So what is offered is your stimuli. What is kindled is your perception. Now you need to understand this. So what is the ahuti here? Ahuti is the offering. So remember, it is a subjective yajna going on. It is not an objective yajna. It is not that you are preparing fire and kindling the yajna. It's not that. It's subjective yajna going on. So how to convert your stimuli into worship? Now when does how to convert a stimuli into worship? So how does a perception created? The perception is created. Now the various perceptions. What are the various perceptions? Perception of sight, sound, smell, taste, touch. Isn't it? Now when does the perception of sound kindled? I hope you can think. Jayama, when does the perception of sound kindled?
When you hear something.
When you hear something. Now let's say, just getting to the conversation we are having now. When I speak, what is coming to you? I'm with you, Jama.
When you speak in words, and that goes to my mind. It is the words.
So when I speak those words, whether you understand or not, okay, that is the stimuli of sound coming your way, isn't it? And when that sound dies, what is kindled? The perception of sound is kindled, isn't it? When I am speaking, the stimuli has ended. What is kindled? Now I hear very clearly, sir, what you are saying, or what you said. So when the receipt, correct, Swamyama, when the receipt of stimuli dies into that particular sense organ, that particular perception is kindled, isn't it? Now, question is how to convert this into yajna. One of the most beautiful sections, as I've said, one of the most beautiful, very subtle concept, very, very subtle. Now, this concept is conveyed very beautifully in the Kenopanishad. In the Kenopanishad, one of the most powerful Upanishads. In verses 5 to 9, please go and refer Kenopanishad at your convenience. Verses 5 to 9, there's a particular phrase he repeats, 5 consecutive verses he repeats 5 times. And the actual verse is, the chanting goes like this. Yadvacha nabhyuditam yena vagavyudhyate tadeva brahmatvam vidhi nedam yadidam upasate yapra yena na praniti yapranite tadeva brahmatvam vidhi nedam yadidam upasate Yang manute yena hurmano matam tadeva brahmatvam vidhi nedam yadidam upasate. So if you have noted in the couple of verses I chanted, he repeats it 5 times. Tadeva brahmatvam vidhi nedam yadidam upasate. Which means that alone is God, not what you people worship here. 5 times he says, that alone is God, not what you people worship here. That alone is God. Now, yadvacha nabhuritam yenava gabhyudhyate. Now what it means, that which cannot be expressed by speech, that which cannot be expressed by speech, that by which speech is expressed. And then in the subsequent verses, as I've said, he says, that which cannot be visualized by the mind, that by which the mind visualizes. Yang manasana manute yenahur manomatam. Yat chakshushana pashyati yena chakshu gushi pashyati. Means what? That which one sees not by the eye, that by which the eye see. Yat shrotrena na shroti yena shrotramidagum shrutam. That which one hears not by the ear, that by which the hearing is heard. Now what it means is, it is not that which enables my eyes to see what I see. It's not what I see, but that which enables my eyes to see what I see. It's not what I hear, that which enables my ear to hear what I hear, that is God. Not what I speak, that which enables me to speak what I speak, that is God. So it doesn't matter what I hear, whether you are hearing Bhagavad Gita, whether you are hearing Bhaj Govindam, or whether you are hearing your wife nagging, or your hysterical shouting of your husband, doesn't really matter. It is just sound falling on your ears, isn't it? So when the stimuli falls on your ears, what is created? Perception is created. It is not what I hear, that which makes me hear what I hear, that is God. My wife can be shouting at me, but I don't react to what she says. I am attuned to Brahman. The fact that somebody is talking to me, whether good or bad, pleasant, unpleasant, doesn't matter. The fact that there is a stimuli that dives into me, a perception that is created, it's a yajna. Now the question is, whether you are able to attune to that and convert every perception into yajna. Isn't it staggering? It is just amazing. I do not know whether you are able to relate to it, what I am saying. Seduraman sir, are you following, sir?
Yeah, to some extent I have understood. Wow. What we hear, we should not, decipher that and have a perception. But the hearing itself, you have to understand.
What makes me hear is
So, correct. So it is not what you go about hearing. There are some people who are capable of converting the very stimuli into worship. So the moment the hearing is triggered, they say, oh my God. Like, for example, people go to a particular place to see a particular sight to appreciate God, isn't it? You go to a particular concert rather, to listen to a particular music, to attune to God, isn't it? So when you listen to divine music, are you not transported to a certain realm? When you see a particular sight, it could be the mighty Himalayas, it could be the Niagara Falls, it could be some majestic, magnificent aspect of nature. When you look at that, what do you say? Oh my God. Huh? You go into raptures. You are Mount Kailash, or anything that is spectacular. You just say, correct, you just have no words to explain that splendor or that glory of creation. You say, oh my God. You're blown away, isn't it? Now can you do that? But there you're still carried away by the perception. But to how to convert the very perception into yajna. So whenever a perception is triggered, you are able to think of the source behind that perception. So when the perception of sight happens, it is not what I see. Now you are carried away by the sight, but it is not what I see. That which enables me to see what I see is God. Not what I taste. That which enables my sense of taste to happen is God. Is not what I hear. That which enables me to hear what I hear is God. It's an extraordinary level. And the Krishna Swami sir, are you following? Yes sir, you can say. You're trying to say something, Krishna Swami sir? Yeah, Sitaramji, as you say, oh my God, audio not, I don't know, there's nothing much I can do from here. If the audio isn't clear, you may have to log out and log back in, sir. But as Sitaram says, what enables the eye to see or ear to hear is what the brain does. Again, we are still playing with the realms of the known. But if you keep going backwards and backwards, go deeper, go to the inner eye. The real inner eye is that Atman. As we say, the Atman or Brahman is that life-giving force. It is that which gives life. And when that spark of life doesn't is taken away, everything seems to be just sentient beings, insentient rather. There is no life. That which lends sentiency, that which gives life to this dead matter is the Atman. So you go back to that very source. So here's another opportunity where you can convert every perception into yajna. I can only say that much. I can go on, but it's for you to get a hold of that concept. Not that easy, I'll say that, but what you understand is every perception that is kindled is when the stimuli dies. So every time there's a perception, you can think of God. Every time there's a perception. You blink an eye, there's a new perception. You can think of the Lord. Isn't it? Every time you blink, there's a perception. You think of the Lord. It's not, but every time you blink, you're carried away by the perception. Don't get carried away by the perception. Instantly you go inward and say, oh, that which makes me see, that which makes me hear, that which makes me smell, etc. So every perception can be converted into a yajna. Okay. Now the fourth yajna is restraint, refers to the gross intellect. Now what is offered? What is offered are the very perceptions, and what is kindled is self-control. So there is a beautiful thought flow. So third yajna is stimuli dies, perception kindled. The fourth yajna is that very perception dies, self-control is kindled. Now, as we have learned a little earlier, now whenever you go through a certain perception, and when you are enjoying a certain perception, what happens with that perception? What do you tend to do? Jayama, whenever you enjoy a certain perception, what is it that one tends to do? We have said that little earlier. It's not just attachment. See, I'm trying to say that when a perception is created, when you enjoy a perception, what is the natural thing people do? No. See, you're talking from a very basic level of Sangama. But what I'm asking is, see, okay, can you tell me what is offered and what is kindled in the fourth yajna? We can't hear you, ma.
The senses are offered and the
No.
restraint is
You please, you see the chart. Did you take a note of the chart? I'm magnifying it now. The fourth yajna, what is offered? Are you able to see on your screen, ma?
yes.
No, the verse 26, fourth yajna. What do you see? What is offered? It is actually big.
Make it big.
What is offered is objects of senses.
Yeah. Not
Is it not big for you all?
very small.
No, the chart is.
Oh, I'm actually enlarging the whole file for you all. You can't see, huh? Okay, here we go. I'll try to make it a little bigger. Is it better now?
Small.
Okay.
Yeah. Now.
So,
Restraint.
The offering is the
అది third yeah.
perception.
So,
The fourth.
Ama.
Perception
So,
and self-control.
offering is the perception, kindle the self-control. Now my question is, when you enjoy a certain perception, what is the thing people tend to do? They tend to linger in the perception, isn't it? They tend to rejoice, they tend to relive, they tend to linger. So what do you do with the perception? Sir?
And the crave for.
Crave for more and more. Yes. So that craving or lingering happens in the perception. So when lingering happens, what are you doing? You are violating self-control. Ilya? So self-control is when a perception ends, you must end your perception with that perception. That's what he said. Learn to practice this quality. I'm typing it out. Try to end perception with perception. Whatever perception you have, try to end with it. You have gone to a movie, you have enjoyed the movie. While you were there in the theatre, be in the theatre, enjoyed the movie. Once the movie ends, you have moved on, leave it behind. Don't keep thinking about it. You've gone for a dining, you enjoyed the time with the friends, you had a lovely meal, you enjoyed it, relished it, leave it at that. Don't keep going back to that and keep mentally reliving that. So try to end perception with perception. So when you do that, what happens is the yajna of self-control is kindled. So you got to understand the yajna. What is the outcome? What is it that is offered? What is sacrificed? What is the cause? What is the effect? So when one lives the life of self-control, what happens? It doesn't produce fresh desires. It doesn't produce any new desires. Your mind is always in the present. You live in the present. I tell you, it's so difficult to convey these concepts, especially perhaps it is possible maybe when you have a physical audience, but it's far more difficult to convey it.
Guruji, I have one doubt actually, this one. Can I ask?
Yes, Amar.
Now this try to end,
Please, Amar.
try to end perception with perception. Again, I just need, for example, Guruji, now our class is going on till 11:50 in as per the Oman time. Say I have between 11 to 11:15, I got one meeting. Okay, my company meeting. That means let's focus on this. You leave about that meeting for timing. That is an yajna, or not to linger about what is happening there. I am missing here. So that's it. That I need to get clarified. Is it right?
Yes, yeah.
Oh.
So ending perception with perception is always keeping your mind in the present. the class you had to leave for whatever reason. Having left the class, you had to go on to another meeting. As you are in the second meeting, your mind is there.
Oh,
You don't keep thinking of what happened. Past is dead, it's gone, finished. You got to live there. So when you cultivate this habit, you are living a life of self-control. Means your mind is very well under your grip.
okay. But normally women,
And in order to get a, yeah, Amar, go ahead, please, yeah, go
normally
ahead.
when what I was thinking, like, I miss that class, and or maybe when I am there, I am missing this also Guruji class. So this is sometimes conflict was coming, but I have to cultivate this one that, to be at focus on that point only. Whatever has happened, finished. That should be my attitude.
Yes.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah. And to get a complete picture of what self-control is, I will give you the reference of chapter 2, verse 64.
Oh,
Please go back to verse 64 of chapter 2 and refer to it. There he gives the complete concept of self-control. I'm not going into it now, but you have the reference. Now, very interesting question. Yes, Amar, thank you. Siddharth is asking a good question. Let's take the example of this discourse. Self-control is verse 64, chapter 2. I've typed it out. Sorry, just typo error. Verse 62, chapter 2. 64, chapter 2. Now what you are asking is, let's take the example of this discourse. I have to dwell on it afterwards to understand and internalize. I cannot just stop thinking of it. Now let's say, for example, that is different to what I'm saying. Let's say after this you have a lunch with your family and friends, let's say. And as you are at the table, you are still engrossed with this concept of yajna, what is kindled, what is restrained, what is perception, what is stimuli. The whole thing is a chaos inside. So you're trying to make sense of it. And as you are having your lunch, you're so engrossed in what happened, or your thoughts are so consumed with what has happened, you're not registering what you're having. You're not able to participate over the meal. Do you think, is that what is the right thing to do? No, that's not what one should do. You have gone through the experience, the perception has ended, the thought should end there. When you are with your family over a meal, you've got to enjoy the meal, that moment, that time. But what you're talking is, I will have to do a conscious recap, which in philosophical terms is known as manana. Reflection or manana is different to lingering or mentally indulging. Mentally indulging creates desires. Reflection or contemplation gets rid of desires. So one is a conscious process, other is an unconscious process. You're not conscious of it. It's just happening subconsciously. I would rather say subconsciously it's happening. Without much effort, it's happening at the subconscious level, which you are not conscious of it. So unknowingly you are doing it. So there's a difference between conscious recap of an idea with the objective of drawing a particular essence or a message, which is known as reflection or manana, which is different to mental lingering or indulging. One gets rid of desires, another creates fresh desires. So there are two different practices. I hope that's okay, Siddharam. Wonderful, sir. What do you mean by that, sir? Chitramangalu?
I am changing the compartment. I have to switch to the another.
Which compartment you are in now? Huh? I don't. So yeah, I suppose what you are saying is just be there when you are there and move on. Switch, keep moving to different. It's an art. It's an art to just live in the present, and you can only live in the present when the perception ends, and that's possible when you live a life of self-control. It's an attribute or a quality of the intellect. Therefore, restraint, the yajna of restraint is attributed to the gross intellect level. Okay. Now, it might take a little time to get to the deeper message. I would sincerely recommend you all to get hold of the recordings when it comes your way and sit and listen to it again. Maybe pause it, try to capture the intricate hidden meaning. Perhaps it will help you to gather a clear material which you can contemplate on. Okay? Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om.